The desert holds its own kind of silence. Not the emptiness of absence, but the quiet weight of memory. It is a silence that feels older than scripture, older than cities, older even than the first stories told around firelight. And it was into this silence that a lone traveler walked, just as twilight began to soften the horizon with shades of violet and rose. The sand was still warm beneath their feet, holding the last touch of the sun. Above, the first stars were emerging, faint glimmers, delicate as breath on glass. The traveler paused, adjusting the linen wrap around their shoulders, feeling the desert wind cool against the skin. They were miles from any living settlement. No roads, no wells, only the endless plain of gold and shadow. Yet they walked with purpose, as though answering a call that did not speak in words. For generations, those who tended to old stories had whispered of a chamber beneath the sands, a workshop or shrine, hidden beneath a plateau in what scholars now call the Western Desert, somewhere between the ancient caravan trails that once threaded through Nubia and the abandoned outposts of old Thebes. Some described it as a place of study, others, a sanctuary of devotion. Some claimed it predated the pharaohs themselves, a relic of an age when artisans and priests were one and the same, and when the heavens were the first scripture humankind learned to read. The traveler climbed the low slope of the plateau. The sky had now deepened into a soft indigo, and the morning star, what astronomers call Venus, shimmered above the horizon, though it was hours before dawn. In ancient Egypt, Venus was known as the herald of both life and death, called Ea, or sometimes Netjerdua, the luminous envoy. To see it shine so brightly before night had fully settled was considered an omen of passage, a threshold, a moment when the seen and unseen touched. At the crest of the plateau, the traveler found a shape half swallowed by sand. A stone lintel, carved threshold, the remains of architecture, not a temple meant for crowds, not a fortress for defense, but something inward, something made for the few. Carefully, slowly, they brushed sand away with their hands. A doorway emerged, its edges smoothed by centuries of wind, yet its symbols still faintly visible. Carvings of stars, arranged not in random scatter, but in recognizable patterns. Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades, constellations known to skywatchers as early as the pre-dynastic period. This place had once been aligned not to earth or river, but to the cosmos itself. With a deep breath, the traveler descended. The air inside was cool. The stone corridor sloped downward gradually, like a gentle invitation rather than a fall. The walls were smooth, polished, reflecting faint starlight from the entrance. As the traveler moved deeper, the last natural light faded, but the stone did not turn to darkness. Instead, something along its surface glimmered faintly, tiny embedded particles of mica or quartz, catching the faintest light and returning it like whispers. At last, the corridor opened into a broad chamber. Temple, not the kind built for kings or processions, not a place of spectacle, but a place of measurement. Archaeologists have found structures like this in several ancient cultures. Temples aligned to solstices in Egypt and Nubia. Stone corridors built to catch a single beam of sunrise. Chambers where shadow was treated as scripture. This one was older. Not broken, not ruined, but weathered, as though time passed differently here. The traveler approached slowly, steps soft in the cool sand. The facade was simple. 2 columns supporting a lintel carved with faint star markings. Not hieroglyphs, not inscriptions of devotion, patterns, geometries, a language of angles and alignment. And here, silence became something sacred. The entrance faced the exact point where the sun would rise at the equinox. Not by accident. Nothing in this place was accidental. Inside, the temple was dim. Light had not yet entered. The traveler waited. Not because they knew what to expect, but because the room itself suggested it, the way one instinctively lowers their voice in a library or breathes slower in a cathedral. The eastern slit in the wall, thin as the edge of a blade, waited with purpose. And then, slowly, the sun rose. A line of light slid across the floor. The chamber was circular, carved with precision. Not the rough marking of a tomb, Not the monumental grandeur of a temple, but a workshop, though no ordinary one. The floor was etched with thin grooves, patterns that spiraled and crossed and converged. They resembled star maps, though not quite the ones used for navigation. They were more intricate, mathematical, aligned to celestial movement rather than static placement. Not scattered, not wandering, precise. The beams struck the far wall and illuminated a carved disk, an image of the solar year. 12 crescents, for points of turning. The slow dance of seasons, etched into stone. This was no ordinary temple. This was a timekeeper. Similar structures are known in the archaeological record solstice temples at Nabta Playa in the Nubian desert, horizon alignments at Abu Simbel, the shadow serpents of Chichen Itza far across the sea, the calendrical halls of the Minoans on Crete. But here, in this quiet valley, was something subtler, something not meant to declare time to a populace, but to understand time from within. Archaeologists who have studied rock-cut chambers in Egypt and Sudan have found similar features in only a handful of locations. Early sanctuaries where priests are believed to have observed equinoxes, solstice shadows, and the heliacal rising of Sirius which once marked the Nile flood. But this room, this felt older, more exact, less ceremonial, more purposeful. The priests who once tended this place, if priest is even the right word, believed time was not a straight path but a circle, a slow turning, a breath that expands and contracts. They did not count days. They listened to them. The traveler moved deeper into the chamber. There were no altars, no idols, no throne of a god, only smooth stone benches, long enough for one person to sit in stillness. This was not a place of worship. It was a place of observation, a sanctuary for attention. The ancients who built this temple may have belonged to the early astronomer-priest class, those who traced sunrise positions across the horizon, who watched stars emerge in the same place each season, who marked the invisible but recurring patterns that shaped planting, flood, migration, and the quiet turning of the year. On the far wall, the traveler found a niche, and in it fragments of thin metalwork. In this valley, they studied light as one studies music. They studied shadow as one studies scripture. The traveler sat on the stone bench. The light continued shifting, slow, inevitable, soft. The world outside awakened, while inside the chamber, time felt suspended. It was here that the traveler understood. This temple was not built to mark time. It was built to slow it, to reveal how gradual the world truly is, how nothing changes abruptly, not the heavy bronze of tools, not the hammered gold of offerings. These were delicate, filigreed, interlocking, like gears or petals or softly turning rings. Their surfaces bore faint markings, patterns of stars, spirals, crescents. They resembled no known instrument of measurement, yet they carried the unmistakable intention of design. How dawn does not break. It arrives, softly, gently, a breath unfolding. The priests who tended this hall likely lived quiet lives. They may have kept records, not in writing, but in memory, stones, and ritual. They would have known when the solstice approached by the length of shadows. They would have known when the seasons turned by the color of dawn. Time to them was alive, not something to measure, but something to accompany. There are records, faint and seldom discussed, of ancient devices crafted to track celestial cycles. The Antikythera mechanism uncovered in the Mediterranean comes to mind, a complex arrangement of bronze gears built over 2,000 years ago to predict eclipses and movements of heavenly bodies. But this workshop predated that by centuries, perhaps by millennia. The traveler closed their eyes. Outside, the valley warmed. Inside, the single beam of light glowed like a thread drawn through the heart of the world. And with time, the light moved on, shifting, fading, withdrawing the way everything does. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was forced. Nothing was lost. Just change, occurring at the pace of breath. The traveler rose. There was no revelation here. Was it possible that there were earlier astronomer artisans? Makers who shaped instruments not merely to observe the sky, but to listen to it? No prophecy. No grand secret. Only this: time is not something we chase. Time is something we move with. It is not a river carrying us. It is a tide moving through us. We are not separate from its cycle. We are its cycle. The traveler stepped back into open air. The traveler knelt, running their fingers gently along the etched grooves in the floor. They felt the faintest indentation, the slightest suggestion of movement, not mechanical but symbolic, like vibrations resting in the stone. The valley was quiet. The sun was now fully risen. The temple cast its shadow, long and gentle, across the sand. No story was completed here. No question was answered. But the traveler left with a soft understanding. Not of time as hours or days or years, but as a pulse. A rhythm that does not hurry, does not delay. The rhythm of growth. The rhythm of decay. The rhythm of return. The myths say that in ages before written history, when the desert was not yet desert, there were those who believed the stars were alive. Not deities exactly, but voices. Great rhythms spiraling outward across the cosmos, touching earth in tides, seasons, dreams. To understand the heavens was to understand one's place within the vastness. And perhaps the priests here did not seek to master time. Perhaps they sought only to sit beside it, to listen, to breathe, to remember. The temple remains still, quiet, patient. Time continues, and the valley holds it gently. These artisans did not build temples to worship the gods. There are places in the world where night does not bring darkness, but a different kind of light, quiet, silver, and undemanding. Light that does not seek attention. Light that simply exists. The traveler found such a place far beyond the deserts, beyond the high valleys, where the land unfolds into plains of tall, whispering grass. Here, the wind moves in slow waves, and the earth carries the scent of old riverbeds and long-settled dust. It is not a harsh land. It is a contemplative one, a place where sound travels softly and memory lingers untroubled. As twilight settled, the traveler approached the remains of a city, though city may not be the right word. It did not sprawl or reach upward. It did not shout its presence. It simply rested on the earth, made of pale stone, round-edged and softened by centuries of weather. The walls were low. The pathways curved gently. Everything was designed to follow the shape of the land, instead of imposing upon it. What made the traveler stop, what made the breath still in their chest were the lanterns. Not lanterns of flame, not oil lamps, not torches, but stone. Dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands, shaped like bowls and columns, towers and open shells. They built instruments to speak with them, polished to a gentle sheen, the color of moonlight. During the day they appeared ordinary, like sculptures or markers. But at dusk, when the sky shifted into its deepening blue, the stone began to glow softly, like embers that had never burned. A silver radiance, cool, even, breath-like. Scholars in modern times might explain such glow as albite feldspar or phosphorescent limestone, minerals that hold light and release it slowly into darkness. The traveler did not know the mineral name, only the sensation, as though the stones remembered the moon and returned it gently to the world. The traveler walked among the silent houses. No roofs remained, only outlines of dwellings, hearth circles, and gathering spaces. Between them, lanterns stood like sentinels of light. Long ago, people lived here. Not a large population, perhaps a community of astronomer-farmers or a monastic settlement or a migrating group that chose to stay. Archaeologists have found similar modest, intentional settlements near ancient trade crossroads, places where the movement of the heavens mattered more than political power. These people believed the moon was not merely a celestial body, but a witness, not with words, but with alignment, with precision, with intention shaped into stone and metal, a watcher of human time, a keeper of cycles, a reminder that darkness is not the opposite of light, but the resting form of it. Their lanterns were not built to shine outward, but to invite reflection inward. The light was not strong enough to see far by. It was light meant for being. The traveler sat beside one of the lanterns. The stone was smooth beneath their hand. It held the temperature of evening, cool, steady, familiar. As night deepened, the lantern brightened only slightly, never overwhelming the darkness, just accompanying it. This was a city that understood something we often forget. Light does not need to dominate in order to guide. The traveler stood slowly, their breath soft and steady, can be gentle, can be quiet, can simply be present. The traveler imagined the people who once walked these paths. Children following moonlit lines in the grass. Elders sitting in circles, telling stories that rose and fell like tide. Farmers waking not by alarm or clock, but by the shifting silver of sky. Here, time was marked not by minutes or labor or urgency, but by cycles of light. The waxing moon marking planting, the waning moon marking harvest. They understood, or perhaps remembered, that some knowledge was never meant to be shouted or engraved in grand monuments. Some truths were whispered into carefully carved chambers, where only those prepared for silence could receive them. Full moon marking gathering, new moon marking silence. The traveler realized that this city was not built around leadership or hierarchy. There were no grand houses, no throne rooms. All dwellings were nearly equal in size and care. This was a community built around attention rather than authority. Attention to sky, attention to seasons, attention to the soft movements of existence. There are ruins in parts of North Africa, the Levant and Central Asia that bear similar features. The starlit mechanisms did not survive in full. Time had taken its share. Sand had filled its corners. The desert had done what deserts always do, preserve and erase in equal measure. Circular homes, shared open courtyards, stone markers aligned to lunar phases. Archaeologists call these places proto-astronomical villages. Early societies where cosmic observation was part of daily life rather than priestly exclusivity. This city of stone lanterns belonged to that same lineage, not advanced in scale but refined in spirit. The traveler stood and slowly walked to the highest point in the settlement, a small rise of stone and earth where a circular platform remained intact. In its center, a cluster of lanterns formed a ring. The circle was not perfect. It followed the uneven, breathing shape of the land, but it aligned precisely with the path of the moon as it lifted into the sky. The traveler watched as the moon rose, yet the feeling lingered. It was full, wide, luminous, unhurried, and as its light touched the stone lanterns, the entire city glowed, not brightly, but like a memory rekindling. Everywhere soft silver, everywhere gentle clarity, everywhere a reminder that darkness was never empty. The traveler sat on the stone platform. There was no need to speak, no need to interpret, no lesson to acquire. The city was not teaching. This place had been a threshold. It was simply being. And in being, it invited the same from anyone who entered. The traveler felt, for the first time in a long time, the absence of hurry, the absence of wanting, the absence of striving. Only breath, only awareness, only presence. The lanterns glowed. The wind moved, a doorway between the earthly and the celestial. The grasses swayed like tides of earth. The moon continued its arc. Nothing profound happened. Nothing was revealed. And yet everything was understood. The traveler stood only when tiredness softened the edges of the world. They left the city quietly. No stone was disturbed. No message was taken. Behind them, the lanterns continued their ancient, gentle work. A workshop of communion, glowing not to illuminate the world, but to remind it that light exists even in silence. And the city waited as it always had, patient, unspoken, whole. The traveler's path led them westward, where the land rose and fell in long, breath-like slopes. The horizon shimmered with heat by day, and by night it unfolded into a dome of stars so sharp and bright it felt as though the sky had lowered itself toward the earth. In this region, storms long past had once scorched the desert sands into something new. Not sand, not stone, but glass. The valley revealed itself at dawn. The first rays of sunlight brushed across the ground and lit it in a faint, shimmering glow. What seemed from a distance like pale dust was, up close, a floor of translucent fragments. Smooth, greenish plates of desert glass stretched across the basin like frozen waves. Scientists in modern times have documented similar formations in Egypt's western desert, large fields of Libyan desert glass, believed to have been formed by an ancient meteor impact or a powerful atmospheric explosion thousands of years ago. Pieces of this same glass were later found in the breastplate of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, carved and polished into a scarab of shimmering green. But this valley was different. Here, the glass was not scattered. It was shaped. The traveler did not attempt to restore anything. Smooth, arranged, organized into patterns, arcs, lines, spirals. A map inscribed upon the land itself. The traveler knelt, letting fingertips graze the surface. The glass was cool from the night, and its transparency gave the illusion of depth, as though one could fall through it into another sky below. The sun rose further, and the valley began to glow from within, as though lit by a quiet inner flame. It was then the traveler saw them. Lenses, shapes carved from the desert glass itself. Discs, some small enough to hold, others large enough to frame both hands. Each one polished into clarity that seemed impossible without metal tools. Yet archaeological records show that even in Neolithic times, artisans shaped quartz and obsidian into blades sharper than steel. Here, the same patience had been given to vision. The traveler lifted a small lens, careful not to disturb its place. Through it, the world shifted. Light bent, distances softened. The horizon seemed closer and farther all at once. It was not like looking through a magnifying glass. It was like looking through memory. The ancients who lived in this valley were not farmers or merchants. They were observers, not priests in the sense of ritual and temple, not scholars in the sense of writing and archives, did not take anything, but something in between, astronomer artisans, those who believed that understanding the sky required both calculation and reverence. They placed their lenses into stone frames, aligned them along the valley floor, arranged them according to the rising and setting of stars. Some were aligned with the heliacal rising of Sirius, the same star whose appearance marked the flood of the Nile. Others pointed toward Orion, whose shape guided travelers, stories, and burial rites. Still others traced the wandering lights of Venus and Mars, planets whose paths were seen as omens and cycles of return. But here, none of these alignments were about prophecy. No predictions of kings. No signs of war or prosperity. Here, the sky was not asked to tell anything. It was simply listened to. Night after night, generation after generation, the astronomers sat in stillness on the glass floor, wrapped in quiet cloth, the air cold and clear around them. They watched. They waited. They learned how stars drift not in lines but in slow spirals. They noticed how the Milky Way shifts through seasons like a river of faint silver fire. They understood that the heavens did not command life, they reflected it. The traveler imagined the sound of those nights. No chanting, did not speak, no drums, only breath, only the soft click of glass being gently set into place, only the quiet wonder of seeing the universe move with patience. Some archaeologists have found notations carved into stone tablets across early cultures, arcs, repeating curves, repeating numbers. Many interpret them as attempts to measure time, but perhaps they were something else, not measuring time, but witnessing rhythm. The traveler walked further into the valley. In the center stood a circular platform of white limestone, untouched by sand. Upon it rested a larger lens, polished to impossible clarity, its surface smooth as water. It reflected the sky perfectly, even in daylight. This was not a mirror. This was a double sky. They simply stood in the hush, allowing the chamber to breathe around them. To look down was to look up. The travelers stepped close and saw themselves reflected, small, temporary, a brief shape in a world of million-year-old stars. And beyond the reflection, the sky shifted, blue deepening toward midnight blue, as though the lens did not show what was, but what would be. The astronomers may have believed that the sky was not above us, but within us, that consciousness was a continuation of the cosmos, that we do not watch the stars watch themselves through us. The traveler sat beside the great lens, letting silence fill the space where thought usually resides. Time did not move here in hours or minutes. It moved in clarity. The longer one stayed, the more the world slowed. Outside, the wind shifted. The morning star glowed brighter. The night deepened into something soft and endless. The more the world softened, the more the boundary between earth and sky dissolved. Eventually, the traveler rose. They did not take a lens. They did not try to carry any understanding away. Some places are not meant to be learned, only witnessed. As they began to walk toward the valley's edge, the sun continued to rise. The glass shimmered. The stones glowed. Perhaps the artisans here were not seeking power. The air held its quiet breath. The valley remained as it always had, patient, endless, listening. Knowledge does not always speak. Sometimes it simply waits. And the astronomers, though long gone, remained present, their silence still echoing through the glass, through the sky, through the traveler's quiet breathing. No revelation required. Perhaps they were seeking understanding. No conclusion demanded. Only this gentle understanding. We are not separate from the stars. We are threads in the same vast tapestry. Light reflected in light. And the valley, ancient and unhurried, remembers. The marshland appeared like a mirage at first. A thin shimmer of silver green across the traveler's horizon, where the desert loosened its grip and water returned to the world. The transition was subtle. The sand softened. The wind carried moisture. The air began to smell of life, of moss, of wet earth, of something ancient that grows without needing to be seen. By the time the traveler reached the water's edge, evening had arrived. The sky glowed in muted rose and gold, fading slowly into dusk. Tall reeds rose from the marsh in countless slender stalks, each one moving gently in the breeze. They did not sway in unison. They moved in layers, like the breathing of a sleeping world. No temples stood here, no monuments, no carved stone pathways. Yet there was presence. Or perhaps, simply, a way to remember that the universe is not distant, but near as breath, as near as heartbeat, as near as silence. A quiet one, a waiting one. It has long been known that in some of the earliest river civilizations, in the floodplains of the Nile, the marshes of Mesopotamia, the deltas of the Indus, people listened to the world not with sight first, but with sound. Before writing, before recorded astronomy, before complex trade routes, there were listeners. Those who listened to wind, to rustling grasses, to patterns in water. They were observers of movement, not through instruments, but through breath and patience. Here, in this marsh, that tradition remained. The traveler stepped onto the spongy earth. The reeds rustled, but not randomly. The sound came in waves, first from the north, then from the east, then in a gentle circle like a message traveling. And then the traveler saw them. Structures, if they could be called structures. Simple frames of wood, reed, and bone, arranged where the wind passed most steadily. Some stood upright, some angled, some suspended by woven cord. They were instruments, but not musical in the way of performance. The traveler ascended the corridor and stepped once more into starlight. They were listeners. Their surfaces were carved with subtle channels directing airflow. Their hollows were shaped to vibrate softly. When the wind moved through them, it did not whistle. It spoke. The sound was gentle, almost imperceptible at first. A low hum, a whisper, a breath. Not like flute or pipe, but like wind remembering something. The traveler knelt and closed their eyes. The marsh was alive with sound. The reeds whispered. The instruments murmured. The water made small, thoughtful ripples. Birds called softly, distant, and unintrusive. Nothing was sharp. Nothing demanded attention. They did not look back. Everything invited it. There are accounts in ancient texts, faint, fragmented, often overlooked, describing priests or watchers who interpreted the sound of wind. In Egyptian tradition, the god Ammonius was said to speak through rustling papyrus. In Mesopotamian myth, The breath of Enlil moved across reeds to reveal direction or change. In the Indus Valley, archaeologists have uncovered reed flutes tuned to wind alone, never meant for human breath. Here, the traveler realized, was a living continuation of that lineage. The oracle was not a person. It had never been one. The oracle was the marsh itself. The traveler listened. The sound rose and fell, changing with barely perceptible shifts in air. It was not language in the conventional sense, but a kind of patterned presence. A gentle coherence. The kind that does not inform the mind but awakens the heart. Some say that those who tended these reed instruments never spoke aloud. They communicated through shared listening, through subtle gesture, through the understanding that arises when attention grows quiet enough to receive. The traveler breathed slowly. Some places are not meant to be held, only honored. The reeds began to move faster, not with force, but with purpose. A breeze passed, warm and steady. One of the bone-framed instruments vibrated, producing a low tone like a memory returning. Another responded, a higher tone, subtle, like the trace of a forgotten lullaby. Then another, soft, rippling, layered. A chord formed, not of pitch but of feeling. It was the sound of something arriving, not a message, not prophecy, not instruction, just presence. The traveler felt something ease within them. The thoughts they arrived carrying, worries that had clung like dust, questions that had sought answers, loosened, not disappeared, just softened, like stones placed in water long enough to become round. And in the quiet that follows, one gentle question remains. The marsh did not solve anything. It did not explain anything. It simply reminded, not all understanding comes from thinking. The traveler opened their eyes. The sky had shifted again. Night had fully arrived. Stars appeared between threads of mist. The reeds stood tall and dark, their tips catching moonlight. The instruments continued their quiet songs. Were these instruments made to understand the gods? The traveler felt no need to stay or to leave. Time here did not move in straight lines. Eventually, gently, they stood. The marsh continued as though unaware of being witnessed. But the traveler understood now. This place did not ask to be known. It asked to be heard. The traveler walked slowly back toward firmer ground. Behind them, the reeds whispered once more. A sound not quite like farewell, not quite like welcome. Something like breath, or to speak with them. Something like memory. Something like, you are part of this world, not separate from it. The traveler continued into the night. The marsh remained, still humming, still remembering, still speaking to those who listen. And the reeds, countless, slender, whispering, swayed as though moved by the quiet pulse of existence itself. The coastline unfolded like a pale ribbon at the edge of the world. Chalk cliffs rising straight from the waters, their faces carved by tides older than memory. The sea below was a deep, steady blue, not turbulent, but heavy with knowing. Waves moved with the dignity of something that has witnessed ages pass without ever needing to speak of them. The sea remembers everything. It was along these cliffs that the traveler walked. The wind carried the scent of salt and stone. The cries of seabirds echoed softly, somehow distant despite being near. The cliffs did not simply stand, they watched. Their layers were like pages, each stratum marked by a different age of earth and tide. And concealed among these ancient pages was a story few remembered. There was once a hall here, a hall of records, though not a library in the written sense, and not a temple in the ceremonial sense. It was built in a time when knowledge was not gathered to teach, nor to claim authority, but to preserve quiet understanding. A time before empires rose along these coasts, before ships learned to cross open seas, before the great harbors carved their geometry into the world. The entrance was not visible from above. The traveler found it only by following the sound of wind moving through stone. A low resonance, like the breath of the cliff. A narrow crevice opened downward, just wide enough for a person to walk sideways. The air grew cooler. The light dimmed. The traveler descended slowly. At the bottom of the passage, an arch of smooth stone revealed itself. No carvings decorated it. No symbols. Only the impression of hands having smoothed the surface, not recently but countless lifetimes ago. Beyond the arch lay the hall. It was not large. It was not grand. It was exact. Even when it forgets our names, even when it smooths stone into sand and coral into dust, the sea holds memory in currents, in pressure, in quiet blue depths untouched by sunlight, and far beneath the waves of the Mediterranean, where the water shifts from sapphire to shadowed indigo, there lies the echo of a city once bright with terraces, courtyards, and open skies, walls curved softly inward, shaped to the natural cavity of the cliff itself. Niches lined the rock, each one occupied by clay vessels, sealed, unbroken, untouched by weather or time. The room smelled faintly of earth, sea air, and something older, the scent of memory made still. The traveler approached one of the vessels. The clay was smooth, pale, reinforced with tiny bits of crushed shell and fine sand, a construction technique known from early coastal settlements around the Mediterranean, particularly from the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age. The vessel was sealed with a lid of resin and wax, hardened yet flexible, a technique used to protect fragile contents from moisture. This was no burial chamber, no reliquary, no storage of grain or oil. These vessels held knowledge, not scrolls, not parchments, not ink. The traveler did not walk here. No, the journey to this memory began with a descent into the deep. Imagine yourself suspended in the quiet water, movement slowed to something like dreaming. Above, the world of waves and daylight grows distant. Below, the ocean becomes a long, slow twilight. It is here, in this drifting hush, that the outlines of columns appear, pale stones softened by centuries, their edges worn like fading thoughts. But memory objects, stone tablets etched with star paths, bits of polished shell marked with tides, bundles of reeds tied to measure currents, crystals aligned to solar angle, fragments of woven patterns that encoded seasonal cycles. Knowledge before writing, not carved into language but into relationships. The traveler did not open a vessel. It was not necessary. In the stillness, understanding came. This hall was built for time itself. For millennia, sailors spoke of this sunken place. Some called it a myth. Others believed it to be one of the many coastal cities swallowed by earthquakes during the late Bronze Age, when the earth trembled and coastlines reshaped themselves like breathing things. There are records in Egyptian ports, in Mycenaean clay tablets, and even whispered among Phoenician traders. A city that charted the sky not to worship it, but to measure it. And the sea had failed to erase it. During the collapse of earlier coastal societies, when storms reshaped shorelines, when earthquakes shook harbors into the waves, when migrations emptied villages, many records vanished. Clay dissolved, papyrus unraveled, wood decayed, oral traditions scattered among displaced families. The world forgot entire lineages of thought. But here, knowledge was sealed for the future, not the present. Meant for those who would arrive when the world was quiet enough to listen again. The traveler sat on the stone floor. The chamber was cool. Shadows moved gently as the sea breathed behind the walls. The sea had come close, closer than comfort. The hall stood only meters above the tide. Storms had risen. The city is gone now. Its markets empty. Its gardens quiet. Its streets walked only by currents and fish that drift like memories made of silver. But something remains. Waves had surged. Salt had brushed the stone. But the vessels remained untouched. The architects had understood the sea, not as something to resist, but as something to respect. They had built the hall deep enough that waves could not reach, high enough that flooding could not invade, shaped the walls to redirect resonance rather than fracture under pressure. This was not ignorance of nature. It was collaboration with it. The traveler imagined those who once tended this place, gathering shells washed ashore by equinox tides, tracking the moon's pull on the water's edge, listening to distant storms through the whisper of wind against stone. Their learning was not stored to keep it. It was stored so it could return when the world needed to remember. Among the fallen colonnades and the shattered steps of what may once have been an observatory, there rests an object unlike anything the sea has claimed. The traveler noticed something else. Faint carvings along the wall near the floor, so light they were almost invisible. Not images, not characters, lines, curves, spirals, patterns of tide, patterns of wind, patterns of moonlight on water. The hall did not document events. It documented rhythms. The traveler closed their eyes. They could hear the sea more clearly now. Not crashing, not roaring, but breathing. In a machine. In like time, like memory, like being. The traveler understood something then, not as explanation, but as sensation. The sea does not erase. It remembers differently. Where we seek permanence, the sea seeks continuity. Small enough to be held in two hands, yet delicate enough that the ocean should have destroyed it long ago. And still, it persists, not whole, but recognizable, like a whisper that refuses to fall completely silent. Where we seek preservation, the sea seeks return. Where we seek identity, the sea seeks cycle. This hall was not a defense against time. It was a partnership with it. The traveler stood slowly. Nothing more needed to be taken. Nothing more needed to be touched. The vessels remained sealed. The hall remained quiet. The knowledge remained safe until the next one who listened came. Archaeologists today know of such an object, the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in the Aegean Sea over a century ago. Its gears and inscriptions revealing a sophistication in astronomy and mathematics previously thought impossible for its age. But the machine beneath these waters is older still, and perhaps not of the same tradition. It rests on a stone pedestal drowned in coral, its bronze wheels locked in stillness, its markings veiled in mineral bloom. The traveler climbed back to the light. Outside, the sky had shifted into twilight blue. The cliffs glowed faintly in the last gold of day. The sea moved steadily, patient and eternal. The hall below did not ask to be known by many, only by those who arrive gently, only by those who understand that silence, too, is a language. The traveler walked on, the sound of waves following like a heartbeat. The sea continued. The cliffs continued. The traveler, or perhaps the dreamer, approaches it slowly, suspended in the hush of the deep. Tiny fish weave in and out of the gears. Algae blooms like soft moss over the metal. Sunlight filters down in thin ribbons, too faint to warm, but enough to reveal the object's shape. The library waited, not forgotten, just quiet. Before the traveler reached the ridge, they heard it. Not a song in the human sense, not melody or chorus, but a low, diffused music as if the air itself remembered how to hum. The sound came and went with the wind, breathing across the hillside in soft pulses. Night still held the valley, blue and unbroken. The first hint of dawn, pale as ash, pressed gently at the rim of the world. At the crest, the landscape opened into terraces cut with care from the slope, each one bordered by pale stones. Between them, grasses held beads of dew, and narrow channels stitched the earth in quiet geometry. At first glance, the place resembled a garden abandoned to time. Nothing ornamental, nothing bright, only forms that followed the hill's long inhale and exhale. Yet the wind passed, and the garden answered, and the traveler understood this was no garden of petals. It was a garden of listening objects. On the lowest terrace stood frames of wood and bronze, their surfaces weathered but intact. Some were taller than a person, others small enough to cradle. Where strings might have run, there were slits and reeds. Where drums might have sat, there were hollow stones pierced with subtle apertures. Along the narrow channels, the traveler saw cups shaped from fired clay, their rims beveled inward, as if made to gather the breath of morning. The wind turned another page of sound, a tone that was neither high nor low, only present, and the traveler felt the body answer with quiet. Such instruments have been known in many times and places, though seldom gathered in a single field. The Greeks spoke of the Aeolian harp, a device that sings when wind threads its strings. In the Himalaya and across East Asia, chimes and flutes tuned to breezes mark thresholds and altars. In the Andes, Archaeologists have found whistling vessels whose tones awaken with moving air and water, and at Chavan de Huantar in Peru, the very stones of the temple carry sound like veins, guiding it with ritual precision. Here on this hillside, evidence suggested a similar, gentler purpose. Not performance, not spectacle, but dawn itself as orchestral director. The traveler moved along the upper terrace. Set into the earth at measured intervals were low, bell-shaped stones. When the traveler touched one, it answered with a near-inaudible ring that lingered longer than such a soft strike should. Some stones do that, ringing rocks, dense with certain minerals, their lattice holding resonance like a held breath. To the west, the traveler saw a row of reed bundles bound in bronze sleeves. When the wind crossed them, it produced paired tones a half-breath apart, a call and an answer braided into one note. Everywhere, alignment. The terraces faced east, their edges drawn to the place where the sun would clear the horizon in late winter, the leaner light of the year's turning. The channels in the soil were not for irrigation alone. They bent at deliberate angles, drawing the breeze down and through the instruments, offering the air a path like a pilgrim's walk. Even the small clay cups had markings along their rims, tiny notches counting intervals. Not language, time. It is not simply a device for telling time. The traveler sat and listened. The garden refused the hurry of interpretation. It asked only to be entered, like a pool not meant for sight but for stillness. Birds began to stir in the thorn shrubs on the slope. A few calls, then the hush again. The garden answered with its own prelude. A thread of tone from the reed sleeves, a breath-long hum from a hollow stone, the softest chime from a line of suspended shells whose nacre shone with the day not yet arrived. There is a wisdom old as settlement. Dawn is an instrument. Air cools. Pressure shifts. Insects and birds wake on their own clocks. The earth vents night and receives fire. In such thresholds, sound travels differently. Lower voices carry farther. High ones lace the edges of things. The people who made this garden had learned the physics by attention, not equation. They cut the terraces to slow wind. They placed reeds where the morning currents concentrate. They tuned stones to the valley's own pitch. The traveler found a niche of masonry beneath a leaning juniper. Inside lay shards of clay incised with spirals and short facets. Not pottery, baffles. Louvered plates to be set inside the wooden frames, their angles catching and turning air the way mirrored heliographs catch and turn light. Another shard held a faint charcoal line drawing. A terrace profile, a series of arrows illustrating wind descent. This was not the rough hand of guesswork. It was craft. And yet, nothing here was the kind of proof the modern world likes to crown. No carved god of music. No inscription proclaiming invention. Only instruments, placements, angles. Only the knowledge of a people who measured belonging, not power. The traveler thought of the Persian bog, water drawn into geometry so that shade and breath could form a dwelling for the soul. Of the Nabateans, chisel-cut channels guiding the desert's rare rain into jars under rock. Of Roman atria where impluvia gathered sky and sound together. The garden on this slope belonged to that quiet lineage, technology that speaks softly, because it is made to listen first. A wind moved, not stronger, only steadier. The garden responded. Across the terraces, tones began to interleave, thin as hair and precise as frost. Some were steady. Others trembled at the edge of audibility, the way a candle trembles before the eye learns to trust its flame. The traveler closed their eyes and could name the elements by ear. Reed, stone, clay, shell, bronze. But naming did not help. The whole was not a list. It was weather turned to him. The first narrow edge of the sun lifted, and the garden changed. The clay cups warmed, and their breath shifted half a tone. The hollow stones gave back a deeper color of sound, as if dawn itself were an instrument with a long, patient body. Birds entered in earnest now, black notes and quick silver trills skipping along hedges and thorn trees. For an instant the human and the more-than-human world sang over one another, not competing but weaving, the garden offering a ground, the living chorus finding it and resting there. On a mid-terrace, a low wall bore faint, weathered markings. The traveler traced them with a fingertip, a line of small circles for days. larger circles for lunar quarters, for symbols at longer span, likely the solstices and equinoxes, and then, below, a pattern of diagonal scratches that did not tally time at all. Took a moment to see them. They were wind. A rose not of directions, but of tendencies. Winter downslope, summer upslope, the median stillness between. The artisans had recorded not only when dawn sings, but how it chooses its voice. There are fields in the steppe where hung bones rattle thin in winter, valleys in the Mediterranean where amphorae once chimed under arches, shrines in Japan whose wind bells thread thresholds with sound, cloisters in Europe where stone makes a note of every footfall. Those places hold a philosophy the traveler recognized here, to compose with the world, not over it. The makers of this garden had not asked music to be born from their will. They had offered the hill a way to hear itself. The sun rose. Light moved down the terraces like water. Where it touched bronze, a quieter tone joined, warmth altering tension just enough to shift the voice. The garden had not one scale but many, each hour a tuning, each season a mode. In the cool months, longer, lower breaths. In summer, quick silver threads. In windless dawns, the almost music of near silence. The traveler realized that what mattered was not sound but relationship. How the instruments welcomed, channeled, and returned what already existed. A memory reached the traveler then, not their own. Hands years ago binding reeds with patience. A child learning where to stand so as not to still the cup's edge. Elders walking the terraces at dusk to set the baffles for morning's wind. A winter spent repairing a cracked stone with resin and wire. A spring when the hill sang after a long silence and the people wept, not with grief but with belonging. Music not as entertainment, but as citizenship in the dawn. Nor merely a star calendar. The traveler did not touch anything. They sat until the sun had climbed a man's height and the garden's voices softened into day. Even then, a line of sound lingered, braided with the insect's first motions, fading into the work of light. The traveler stood, and for a long breath simply bowed, not to an altar, but to a practice. Perhaps, the traveler thought, the garden had once been part of a larger complex. Terraced fields below for barley and flax. A spring house where coolness kept milk through the first heat. A small observatory stone where shadow offered noon. Evidence on the lower slope suggested cut channels for seasonal water. And near the ridge, a scatter of charcoal and bone, as if shared meals had waited for the day's first song before beginning. Nothing broken by violence. Nothing abandoned in haste. Only the long relinquishment all places know when people are called elsewhere. The traveler began down the path. Behind them the terraces lay quiet under a broadening sky. The instruments did not follow or plead to be remembered. They were made for something larger than memory, for a conversation that continues whether a witness arrives or not. At the edge of the garden, a final breath of wind crossed the hill. The reeds answered with a closing sigh. The shells gave a last small chime. In the cups, the air settled. The stones returned to their inward ring. The traveler understood the lesson that needed no words. Some voices are not ours to hold. We meet them only by standing in the right light, at the right hour, when the world itself is singing. And as the traveler stepped into the day, the garden remained as it had always been, a patient instrument tuned to the oldest music there is, dawn, arriving. It is a reflection, a map of the sky in motion. The traveler descended from the hills where the garden of Dawnsong rested, and soon the land opened into a plain. It was not empty, though at first it seemed so. A soft, golden field that stretched until the horizon blurred into light. The grasses here did not stand tall. They lay low and fine, like threads of silk pressed gently by time. No settlements were visible. No walls, no cairns, no carved markers. Only a faint impression of movement across the earth, like a memory of footsteps. This was not wilderness. This was a road. But a road that refused to be known as one. It did not cut the land. It followed it. Not straight, not deliberate, not insistent. A road that wound where the plain wanted to breathe. A road walked so long, so quietly, that it had become gentle. The traveler understood. Ancient civilizations did not believe the heavens were static. They believed the stars moved in patterns that echoed cycles of life, death, flood, harvest, and return. They watched the moon swell and wane. They listened to eclipses like omens. They followed the heliacal rising of Sirius to predict the Nile flood. In this city beneath the waves, they built their understanding into metal. This was the road taken by people who carried memory, not in stone or scrolls, but in themselves. The ancients called such travelers archivists, though they left no name for themselves. Archaeologists sometimes refer to them under broader terms: oral tradition keepers, memory bearers, nomadic historiographers. But those words press too hard. These were not recorders. They were rememberers. They walked not to transport goods, but to ensure the world did not forget itself. The traveler followed their road. The air was soft and warm. The sun lay low and quiet, as if listening. Grass brushed the traveler's ankles whisper-light. After some time not counted, only felt, the traveler saw the first sign. A circle of stones no larger than a table. Each stone worn smooth, none carved, none lifted. Their arrangement was precise yet unforced, as though the stones had been persuaded, not commanded, to gather. The traveler sat by the circle. The gears here correspond to celestial rhythms, subtle, spiraling measurements of lunar phases, the tilt of the seasons, the wandering dance of Venus across the sky. The artisans who built this device were not mere mathematicians. They were keepers of cycles, listeners to the world's slow breathing. Silence settled, not emptiness, the fullness of something held but not spoken. These circles appear across many landscapes in many ages. In the Eurasian steppe, in the Levant, across Anatolia, in forgotten valleys of the Hindu Kush, along migration paths of the San, the Sami, the Himba. Always small, always quiet, always perfectly unremarkable to those who seek monuments. But to those who listen, they are thresholds, places where memory rests before continuing its journey. The traveler touched one stone. Its surface was warm from the day, cool within. The kind of stone that keeps a story the way clay keeps shape. There were no inscriptions, but the memory was there. The city, too, reflected this listening. Its terraces rose in tiers, arranged to catch star shadows during certain nights of the year. Pools of still water were used to double the sky, the heavens above reflected in the heavens below. Rituals took place not at altars, but in observatories open to the night. Not in detail, in texture. It is known that some cultures carried their history not in words, but in cadence, in pacing of speech, in breath between sentences, in rhythm of footsteps through landscape. Knowledge was stored in the body, not in written record. The archivists who walked this unmarked road passed memory not by reciting it, but by walking it. A story learned in a room can be forgotten. A story learned with the feet is remembered forever. The traveler continued. As the sun lowered further, shadows lengthened, and the grass glowed amber. The road widened slightly, though no hand had shaped it. Distance meant nothing here, only direction not toward a place but through a way of being. Soon the traveler saw a second sign. A lone figure-shaped stone, not carved, only chosen. Its proportions suggested a person standing in quiet attention, facing east. Wind had smoothed its surface. Lichen traced its shoulders like shawl. It did not represent a person. It represented presence. To stand here was to acknowledge that memory does not vanish. It simply waits for the next one who remembers. And yet the sea came. The traveler stood beside the stone and closed their eyes. The wind moved across the plain, soft, slow, carrying something that felt like breath before words. The archivists would have stood like this, not speaking, not performing, only allowing memory to come to them. For memory, when truly listened to, arrives like dawn, not sudden, not forced, a slow unfolding of light. Perhaps it came suddenly. The traveler walked on. The plain grew cooler. The first evening star blossomed faint and white. Then the traveler saw the third sign. People. Not a settlement, just a gathering. 5 figures sitting in a circle, a small fire in their center. No tents, no belongings, only light shawls, travel-worn sandals, and calm presence. Their faces were lined not with age, but with time, the kind of time that does not measure life in years but in horizons crossed. The traveler approached slowly. No one looked up in surprise. Perhaps it came slowly. They had known someone would come. A space was open in the circle. The traveler sat. No words were exchanged, because archivists did not teach by speaking first. They listened together. For a long while, nothing happened. The grass swayed. The fire breathed. The sky deepened to cobalt. An earthquake. Then one of the archivists exhaled. A long, soft breath, and another answered with the same. The traveler realized this was not greeting. It was tuning, aligning the rhythms of breath the way instruments are tuned before dawn song. When the story came, it did not come in sentences. Came in pauses. A tilt of the head toward the horizon. A hand tracing the curve of a remembered mountain. A glance at the fire when a sorrow passed through time. A softening of the shoulders when peace returned. The traveler understood every part of the story, not because it was told, but because it was shared. Story not as content, a shifting of the earth's crust, but as presence. Knowledge not as possession, but as companionship. These archivists did not protect history. They walked it. The traveler breathed with them, and memory settled, not like information stored, but like a bird finding rest. The fire crackled once, softly. Then silence returned, not ending, but completing. One of the archivists placed a stone into the traveler's hand. Smooth, round, warmed by fire. Not a token, not a symbol. A stone that had accompanied many steps and would accompany many more. A rising of tides. You carry memory by carrying wayfinding, the traveler understood. The archivists rose one by one, dispersing into the night. Not together, not apart. Each taking the road that memory asked of them. The traveler remained for a moment, holding the stone, feeling the warmth fade slowly into cool evening air. Then they rose too. There was no direction to choose. Only one way to walk, gently, and the unmarked road continued, a single misalignment in the delicate balance between land and water. As it always had, quiet as breath, certain as dawn, endless as remembering. Night had nearly settled by the time the traveler reached the foothills. The plain faded behind them, dissolving into soft darkness and memory. The sky had deepened into a violet blue, the kind seen only when the sun has left but the moon has not yet lifted itself into view. The air was cooler here, touched by stone. The traveler could feel the mountain before they saw it, not as shape but as presence. The slope before them was not steep. It rose with slow patience, covered in low shrubs that had taken root in cracks of ancient rock. A narrow pathway wound upward, so faint it might have been mistaken for the wandering of sheep or goats. But the traveler knew better. This was a road of pilgrimage, not one taken for spectacle or festival. One taken by those who sought stillness that required no answer. The traveler followed the path upward. Loose gravel shifted underfoot. The scent of sage and cold earth filled the air. The first stars brightened, and then breath caught. A stone doorway revealed itself, not carved into the mountainside, but growing from it, as if the mountain had once softened and opened itself and then cooled again into form. The lintel was plain, the threshold low. No inscription announced a purpose. No guardians flanked it, and yet nothing about it felt abandoned. The doorway was an invitation. One evening, the people of the city looked out and saw waves where the horizon had once been. And the world changed. The traveler stepped inside. The air changed immediately, cooler, stiller, fuller. Sound softened until footsteps disappeared into the earth. The corridor ahead was narrow, just wide enough to walk without brushing the walls. The walls were smooth, not by tool, but by countless hands over countless generations. Each touch had polished the stone into gentleness. After a few steps, the passage widened. And there, the chamber opened. It was not large, perhaps the size of a small hall or community room, but its shape was perfectly round. The ceiling rose into a shallow dome, dark and resonant. The floor was flat and worn, its center slightly polished, as though many feet had stood there in silence. But the traveler's breath drew, still not because of the architecture, but because of the figures. Around the circumference of the chamber, carved directly from the stone, sat a ring of human shapes. Not statues, not sculptures. Some fled inland. Their descendants carried stories. Not representations. Shapes of seated people, carved in the posture of rest, hands placed gently in their laps, heads bowed slightly forward. Not asleep in the sense of slumber, asleep in the sense of deep inwardness. Their faces were simple, almost smooth, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. Expressionless in the way the sea's horizon is expressionless, containing everything. 14 of them, equidistant, perfectly spaced. The traveler stepped closer. Here was a tradition known but seldom understood. Across the Mediterranean, the Near East, Central Asia, and the mountains of Anatolia, archaeologists have found seated stone figures, often arranged around circular sanctuaries. Many theories surround them: ancestors, guardians, priests in eternal meditation, representations of communal unity, but none are certain. For the travelers who walked the unmarked roads, these were known simply as those who remember by sitting. The traveler knelt in the center of the chamber. Silence was total, not the absence of sound, but the fullness of it. A silence with weight, a silence shaped like water resting in a bowl. The stone sleepers did not look at the traveler. Some stayed, believing the city would endure. They did not welcome. They did not reject. They shared stillness. The traveler breathed slowly. In this chamber, time did not move in straight lines. Pooled, settled. It waited. Once, perhaps, people gathered here, not to ask for wisdom, but to remember the stillness the world forgets. The ancients may have come here at turning points of the year, solstice, equinox, when the world shifts between light and dark. They may have come to sit among the stone sleepers and match their breath to the mountains' breathing. For mountains do breathe, though slowly. Some simply vanished into the silence, expanding with warmth, contracting with cold, moving air through unseen caverns and cracks. The traveler closed their eyes. Breath slowed, shoulders loosened, thoughts released like feathers letting go of wind. There was no teaching, no message, no revelación, only presence shared. The sea does not speak of what happened. After some time, or perhaps no time at all, the traveler felt something subtle. Not sound, not movement, not vision. A realization. The stone sleepers were not guardians of knowledge. They were witnesses. Witnesses to those who enter. Witnesses to those who remember. Witnesses to the quiet inside all living beings. The traveler opened their eyes again. The stone figures remained unchanged, but now they did not seem like stone. It remembers, but it does not tell. They seemed like stillness wearing shape. The traveler did not speak. Speech would have broken something delicate. Instead, the traveler sat there in the center, cross-legged, hands resting like water at rest, breathing with the earth. The chamber held them, not in possession but in welcome. Outside, the moon rose, and though its light did not enter the chamber, something shifted. The air cooled slightly, the silence deepened, the world settled further. It was the kind of quiet that only exists where nothing needs to be different. The traveler's hand hovers near the machine, but does not touch. The traveler did not know how long they sat. The chamber holds no hours. When they finally stood, the body felt softer, the mind quieter, the heart unhurried. Before leaving, the traveler placed one hand on the floor, not to take anything, not to give anything, but to acknowledge shared presence. Then they walked up the corridor and back into the night. The moon hung low and luminous. The plain glowed faintly below. The air was neither cold nor warm. It simply was. The traveler did not look back. Some knowledge is not meant to be taken. Not from fear, from wholeness. The stone sleepers remained in their eternal sitting, witnessing, remembering, resting in the quiet truth the world seldom speaks. There is a kind of knowledge that can only be learned by becoming still enough to hear your own existence. and the traveler walked on. The traveler walked through the night, and the land slowly lowered itself into a wide basin. The moon was high now, pale and full, laying a soft silver skin across everything it touched. The wind was gentle, steady, carrying the faint scent of cold water. Eventually, a glimmer appeared in the distance, still and dark, like glass laid upon the earth. Some memory is not meant to be disturbed. A lake, not broad, not deep by the look of it. A quiet lake, bordered by reeds and low stones. The surface did not ripple. The wind passed above it without disturbing it, as though the water held its own private gravity. The traveler approached its edge. The stars reflected perfectly, so perfectly that for a heartbeat, the traveler felt the world turn upside down. Sky below and earth above, all suspended in a delicate balance of breath. At the center of the lake floated a boat. Small, simple, carved from a single tree trunk, its bow slightly raised. But the surface of the boat was covered in markings, and the traveler recognized them immediately. Stars. Instead, we linger. Constellations, not carved in decoration, but carved in alignment. Delicate incised dots connected by faint, shallow lines. The traveler traced their eyes along the bow. The 7 hunters, the sleeping bear, the river that circles the sky. Names change from culture to culture, but the sky remains. The boat did not drift. It sat perfectly still, anchored not by rope or stake, but by balance. The traveler stepped onto a flat stone at the water's edge. We listen. The stone was worn smooth. Many feet had stood here waiting, perhaps for dawn, perhaps for permission, perhaps for something without name. A low wooden platform sat nearby, sun-bleached and silent. A paddle rested upon it. The traveler lifted it, lightweight but strong, smooth, well-handled, not abandoned. The waves have a rhythm here, not the loud crash of surface surf, but the slow pulse of the deep, a heartbeat of the world. If one listens closely, it sounds like breathing. Remembered, the traveler placed one foot, then the other into the boat. The wood did not groan or shift. The boat accepted the weight as though it had been waiting. The traveler pushed gently against the stone, and the boat glided, effortlessly, into the center of the lake. No sound, not even the soft lap of water. And perhaps that is what this machine measured. The lake held everything in stillness. The traveler set the paddle across their lap and looked down. The water reflected the night sky so clearly that it felt as though the boat floated in the heavens themselves. The stars above and the stars below formed one continuous sphere, and the traveler sat in its center. One world, 2 reflections, no boundary. The carvings on the boat were not random. They were a map, not of land, not of destination, not the stars themselves, but of orientation. For thousands of years, people have used the stars to travel across desert, grassland, ocean. But some among them did not travel through space. They traveled through understanding. The traveler saw it now. Each star carved on the boat matched a star reflected beneath the water. Not one mark was misplaced. Not one line was careless. This was not a vessel for journeying. This was a vessel for remembering how to look. The traveler laid the paddle aside and leaned forward, placing fingertips into the water. But the rhythm that binds them. The lake did not ripple. The surface parted only enough to accept the touch, and closed again as if sealing a secret. The traveler whispered, though there was no reason to speak, and the whisper felt like it belonged to the world, not the mouth. Some cultures taught navigation by walking the sky, lying back and memorizing the turning of constellations through the seasons. Others built stone circles aligned to solstice dawns or moonrises that returned every 19 years. Others etched star maps into bone, driftwood, or shell to teach children not where to go, but where they already were. This boat belonged to that lineage, the lineage that believed the sky is not above us. It includes us. The traveler closed their eyes. The boat felt still. The lake felt still. The quiet architecture of the cosmos. The stars felt still. but something moved, not around them, within. A slow turning like a great wheel, deep and ancient, not of motion but of awareness. A memory not personal but older, a way of knowing that does not require learning. The traveler breathed, and the breath felt like part of the sky. Time did not pass, or perhaps it passed completely. The unseen harmony that connects tide to moon. Then, gently, the traveler opened their eyes. The lake had changed. Not visibly, but perceptibly. The stars seemed clearer. The silence deeper. The world more present. The traveler reached for the paddle, placed it in the water, and pushed lightly. The boat glided back toward the stone, landing as smoothly and soundlessly as it had come. When the boat touched the shore, the traveler stepped out.
No ceremony.
Seed to season.
No farewell.
Only gratitude. The paddle was returned to its resting place on the platform. The traveler looked back once, and only once. The boat floated at the center of the lake, unmoving, exactly where it had always been, waiting, not for a person, but for a moment, birth to return, for a night when a mind is quiet enough, to hear what the stars have said forever. You are not lost. You are inside the map. The traveler walked on into the night, carrying no new knowledge, only a deeper remembering, and the lake held its stillness, as the stars held theirs. The traveler walked for a long time beneath the steady moon, though the word long had lost any meaning. Distances no longer measured themselves in steps. They measured themselves in breaths. The world seemed to widen and soften, as if the land knew the journey was nearing a threshold. The traveler did not feel completion, only a kind of deepening, the way a well deepens when the water settles perfectly clear. It is a reminder that the world is not separate from the heavens. The path curved gently around a ridge of stone and low shrubs, and the land suddenly opened to the east. There, where the horizon met the dark, something was changing. The sky was no longer night, nor was it yet morning. It was the color of quiet anticipation. A slow silver glow had begun to gather at the farthest edge of the world, faint and delicate, like a thought forming before words. The traveler stopped. This was not dawn yet. This was the moment before dawn, the hour when the world holds its breath. Ancient travelers, monks, desert hermits, astronomer priests. Many had spoken of this hour in fragments and whispers. In Egypt, it was said that the Creator spoke the world into being during this hush. In Greece, they named it the first light of Psyche, the soul's remembering of its own form. In the mountains of Central Asia, it was called simply the returning. The traveler took a seat on a smooth stone, one that had clearly been used for sitting many times before. The surface bowed inward from countless quiet rests, countless watchers of countless dawns. The traveler set down the pack, though it was lighter now somehow. The air shifted. The sky does not hang above us. The stars did not fade. They simply grew quieter. The moon dimmed like a held breath. The lake, though now far behind, seemed to remain in memory, still and whole. And into that stillness came something like remembering. Not a memory of events or story, a memory of existence itself, the quiet truth underneath movement and thought and time. The traveler felt it, not as idea, not as insight, but as a gentle returning to self. That the world is not separate from the one who walks it. That silence is not emptiness but foundation. That nothing has been gained or achieved, only remembered. It moves through us. The horizon brightened. A deep blue, richer than night, softened at the edges into pale violet. The traveler watched as color formed the way music forms. Quietly, layer by layer. The sky expanded not outward, but inward. The traveler thought of the chamber of the stone sleepers, the quiet that needed no voice, the archivists of the unmarked road, memory carried by breath and pace, the garden of dawn song, instruments made to listen to the world before it spoke, the star-marked boat, floating at the center of the mirrored heavens. None of these were separate. They were a single way of remembering. The traveler ascends again, rising through layers of ancient water. A way of being that once was common, when time was measured not in hours but in rhythms, the movement of birds, the return of rains, the slow arc of stars across the winter sky. A world where knowledge did not insist, where truth did not demand, where meaning did not come from searching, but from noticing. The sky brightened a little more. Now there was the faintest line of gold at the horizon, slender, almost shy. The traveler felt the body respond. Breath deepening, shoulders releasing, spine rising as if to greet something ancient and familiar. This was not awe. It was belonging. The traveler realized. The machine remains where it has been for centuries. Quiet, waiting, held gently in the hands of the sea. There had never been a journey to a destination. There had only ever been a journey toward remembering. The first bird sang. A single, small sound, like a thread of silver drawn through silence. Then another, and another. Not chorus, not celebration, just agreement. A second strand of gold joined the first. It does not need to be recovered to be understood. Then a third. The sky opened. The traveler watched as the darkness did not withdraw. It revealed. The land took shape softly, the curve of distant plains, the shadow of low stone, the faint shimmer of dew on grasses. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Dawn was not arrival. Dawn was acceptance. The traveler felt warmth touch the cheek, so faint it might have been imagined. And then, slowly, the sun's edge broke the horizon. Not sudden, not triumphant, like a memory returning with the gentleness of a familiar hand resting quietly on the shoulder. The traveler exhaled. A long, soft exhale that seemed to carry the entire night with it. This purpose lingers in a place beyond explanation. No words came. There was no need for them. The light rose, brushing the land with quiet gold. The traveler stood. The world was the same, and entirely new. Not because anything had changed, but because the traveler now saw that the world does not speak in answers. It speaks in presence. Perhaps it was built to guide the living. Saw that knowledge does not descend like revelation. It arises from listening. Saw that the traveler had never walked alone. Every step had been accompanied by silence, by memory, by the earth itself. The traveler lifted the pack again, not to continue the journey, but because the journey continues the traveler. Perhaps it was built to remember the lost. The light grew, birdsongs multiplied, the land breathed, and the traveler walked forward, quietly, steadily, into the day that was now forming, not seeking, not holding, only being. The path did not need to be known. The traveler did not need to know it. For the world remembers, or perhaps, softly, slowly, like a tide that never truly ends, and the traveler remembers with it. Light returned, not as beginning, not as end, but as the gentle truth that has always waited. We are always coming home. It was meant to remind us that we, too, are made of cycles, and the sea, patient and vast, holds that memory for us. The valley was quiet long before the traveler arrived, a hush held between mountains of pale stone, where the wind moved like a careful whisper. The air was thin here, high in the desert plateau, where the horizon stretched in every direction like a scroll of emptiness. Yet nothing felt abandoned. The silence felt kept, tended like a relic. Before dawn, the world softened into silver blue. The sand was cool. The breath of night still lingered. And just as the first suggestion of light crept into the east, a faint outline emerged from the stone. Not carved in grandeur, not towering or royal, but humble, refined, and deliberate.